blah, 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 blah. And today we're going to be talking about why first impressions kind of don't really matter. So this was a conversation that I was kind of passively in, not really doing much of the talking myself, but I had just recently joined the Blade Bias official Discord, and I was sitting there playing a game. I was playing White Knuckle. For those of you who don't know what that game is, give it a check out. It's super fun on PC. But I was playing that, and some other fellas were in that call. They joined in, and they were just chit-chatting about balisongs, and they made a really good point. They talked about how first impressions are, kind of unreliable. When I grab a new knife, obviously the first thing I'm going to notice are kind of like these overarching qualities. Is it heavy, light? How's the grip? What's the balance? What's the tune? But the reality is that all of these aspects are subject to change, at least in my opinion, subject to change with more time and more experience and more time flipping the balisong. Something like tolerance, for example. If you have like cheaper washers, like brass washers, right? Those are going to lose their tune much quicker because they are much softer. So while the tune might be good out of the box, no questions with that, given more time, that first impression of the quality of your tolerances, that's lost. Let's say grip. Your hands are constantly changing with moisture, how much oil they have on them. Say, for instance, you just wash your hands. I have some knives where if you just wash your hands, they become the most slippery thing known to man. And I have some other ones where it's completely opposite. Now, another aspect of that is texturing. I think a good example of this is like the slite that I have, the NRB slite, and that is that it has a ton of texture. Now, I personally always love aggressive texturing because I'm not like I don't mind if it's a little rough, but some people, that roughness is something that really only becomes more of potentially a bother to somebody the more you have flipped something. So if I just grab it out of the box, I'm flipping it, I'm not going to know if I really like aggressive texturing just yet. So I might be hyping it up, but in reality, as I spend more time with whatever balisong it might be, that might change. Okay, well, let's talk about balance. I think something that kind of goes in with tunes as well is that, you can have a preference for a balance. But, as tolerances change, the knife will generally get a little looser. Balances kind of shift, or at least the perception of them shift. So I think a good example of that is this fella. Just recently found this one again. It was my brother's car, of all things. So I just saw him again, and this is a Bali Plus Kraken clone, and obviously its tolerances are horrible. But that's because it's got a bunch of spare parts in it, and this guy basically lives in the concrete. But when I have this thing fully cranked, it feels much more handle bias. However, when the tolerances are looser, it actually, in terms of perception, moves more towards the neutral. Now, I couldn't really offer you an exact explanation as to why that is a difference with it, but it is something that I do notice, that knives, as they lose their tolerance, are going to, the balance is just going to feel slightly different. And then last but not least, I don't think you get a chance to throw all the tricks at a knife when you first get it. And what you find is that every knife is going to do some tricks better and some tricks worse. It's just how the cookie crumbles. There is this interesting exchange between balance and what is possible. And I think that's what makes balisong so fascinating, is that, no matter what it is, there's always going to be oddities to it. And it's just to learn to come to accept those realities. But the thing is, like I said, you don't get to flip every single trick you're trying to do with every single balisong when you first get it. You know what I mean? So I remember like the Slight, really fantastic fixed ladders. Part of that is the texturing that's on the faces, but what it does kind of struggle a little bit with are cherry pickers and rollovers, simply because it has much more blade weight leaning towards that blade bias configuration. I think this problem is exacerbated. This overarching problem of first impressions is further complicated by adjustable weight systems. You know, I've gone on to say that adjustable weight systems are a complex thing regardless, because, you know, there's something about not knowing what the optimal balance is. I mean, obviously that optimal balance is dependent on the individual, but sometimes it's nice, especially if you're newer in the hobby, to pick up a balisong that somebody else who is more experienced in flipping knows what feels good and what will perform well. Now, as you continue down your own development, you will develop your own preference and your own taste. So, you know, a review only goes so far. You kind of have to just experience it for yourself to truly be able to give an opinion on something. I mean, looks is one thing, and I think that, you know, obviously you don't need to flip the thing to like how it looks. And I think most of the time when people are shopping, they're shopping with their eyes first, right? They're looking at the design. Does it speak to me? Is it something that I think looks cool? Which is honestly going to make you want to flip it more often. And in my situations, I think I do a lot of first impressions just because it's exciting to discover what a balisong has. But you really do need to spend time with it. Now, there is a lot more content to be said about our reviews necessarily important, because there is, you know, some discrepancies between reviewer to reviewer, as well as the idea that every individual flipper is going to want and prefer different qualities and have different hierarchies of what they deem to be important in a balisong, which will influence their opinions on the overall attitude or opinions towards a balisong, right? So yeah, I think this is just something to be aware of when myself and others, you know, we post like a first impression. You know, everything is always taken with a grain of salt. You know, nothing is black and white, and I might like something, but you might not. And especially with the, whoa, I accidentally hit my phone. Especially with a first impression, it is just that, a first impression. And honestly, most of the time, my opinions are subject to change, at least in some capacity. So, you know, as somebody who is looking for a knife, considering purchasing something, make sure to do your due diligence. Search for multiple reviews if possible. Obviously, certain knives and brands have less traction, less media exposure, which makes that more tricky. But I think that's where, you know, you as the individual who's watching this video, your opinions on a knife are just as important, just as valid as a seasoned flipper. You know, obviously the seasoned flipper is going to be more aware of some of the smaller details, but I think it's still important to contextualize the whole balisong experience of whatever product it might be, even if you are a new flipper, because those are important things to think of. If you're a maker who only considers the top-end flippers, you're slicing out a considerable amount of the market that is there. Because in reality, I mean, obviously I don't know the exact percentage, but the people who are committed to being high intermediate or advanced flippers, that's a small portion of the actual base of flippers. Because most people, you know, this is just another thing that they're doing casually. And therefore, you know, it's kind of the same issue with video games, where it's like, do you balance a game to the competitive scene, or do you balance it to the casuals? And there's no real great optimal answer, but it is something to consider. So anyways, that was all I had to say for this video. I hope that you guys have an excellent week. there is discussions about me finally moving, which would mean I have a backyard and I can actually use the head cam that I purchased a while ago. So if that's the case, yippee, great. But that will also mean that'll be moving. So in that event, the videos should be different. You won't get to hear me breathing into the mic so hard. But let's try to do a little flipping until I drop it. And then we'll just end the video whenever that happens. I have learned a couple of new things. I've been looking at Oximity's concept highlights on their Snapchats or on their Instagram story, and I think what they're doing is excellent. And if you are feeling stagnant with your flipping, give it a go. Screen record it, lower the speed, and try to learn something new, because that always brings a lot of spice into flipping. So that was that. Double scissor is a no-go. Pez flips, this is me. See you guys later. Bye.